Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another lesson on the Torah portion of the week. I would like to concentrate tonight, with the time permitting, on two main topics. And if we have time, which I doubt, we can talk about some small stuff as well. The first is there is a Jewish law that dictates how we treat animals. One of the rules are that we must feed animals that in our possession before we ourselves eat. If I have a fish tank or I have parrots or I have a pet, they must be fed before I can eat. How do we know that? Because in the Torah, if you study the Shema, where God blesses the Jewish people, it says, "Venatati esev besadcha livemtecha," in the Vayam Shema, in the second chapter of Shema. I will put grass to your animals, ve'achalta vesabata, and you'll eat and be satiated. We see God is blessing us by feeding the animals, by telling us if He will be providing food for animals. And then, in addition, we will be able to enjoy food. From here, we derive that when one sees animals or has own animals, they must feed them, but not only feed them, but feed them before he himself can eat. The reason for it, why is it actually this way? There are many. I'm going to share briefly three reasons. The first reason is Tsa'ar Ba'alei Chaim. To be kind to animals, not abusing animals, is part of Jewish law, and therefore, if one will go and eat himself before feeding the animals, we know what happens after the meal. You sit down, you smoke a cigar, you drink something, you end up going to sleep, to take a walk, you forget about the animals, and the animals end up suffering. Therefore, the Torah says you must feed the animals before you can sit down to eat. The second reason given is that we must imitate God's way. God is very kind and compassionate. Before we ourselves are benefiting from food that God provides, we want to imitate God's way, and therefore we begin by feeding an animal, finding someone who can benefit from us, and by doing so, we are copying, imitating God's behavior. The third explanation, and I'm going through very quick, it can be discussed at great length. The third explanation given is, and we say it during the high holidays, when we ask God for salvation, we say, Adam u'be'emat toshia Hashem. God, please provide salvation and save the life of Adam, man, u'behema, and animals, toshia, you will save. Why? Because animals have no choice. There is no freedom of choice provided to animals. The only one who is possessed freedom of choice is human being, and therefore men can sin and can be punished by God. Animals, on the other hand, they cannot be punished because they cannot misbehave. They were programmed to provide and do and act, and they follow through just like a machine. And therefore, sometimes God will save men because of the animals. When man is actively doing something wrong and he deserves to be punished, God forbid, God will save man due to the fact that the animal can be affected by that. Therefore, what we do is we feed the animals before we start eating to remind God that the animals need my help and they are relying on me. By doing so, I am providing a chance. If God forbid my life is on the line, God will say, 1 second, this man is providing sustenance for one of my creatures, and for that sake, I will save their life. And therefore, God will spare us And that's why we feed the animals first. This is only during the weekdays. During the weekdays, we must help animals by feeding them. Not only that, if I see an animal while I'm on the way to eat, I must feed them first. So in Israel, or in some zoos, or in a petting zoo placing, that you sit down with your family. Many times I would travel to SeaWorld or Busch Garden, and we would sit down to eat. We would bring lunch with us, and then there will be birds, and there will be sometimes a petting zoo around. We would feed the animal, provided there's the zoo, of course, the zoo allows. We're not going to, God forbid, overfeed them, but we will make sure to feed animals before we ourselves are benefiting from food. This rule applies only on the weekdays. On Shabbat, there is an exception. On Shabbat, we must feed animals that we are responsible and they depend on us. Other animals just living near us or passing by, it is a prohibition to feed them. Why? The rabbis tell us that feeding animals involve hardship, and on Shabbat you must rest. So if I walk by the street and I see a turtle or I see an animal and that's not my pet, they are not dependent on me to feed them, on Shabbat it is forbidden to feed them. On the weekday it is a mitzvah, and if I'm about to have a meal, I must feed them before I myself eat. There is one exception to the rule, and I don't believe you will guess it. And the exception is a dog, kelev. A dog in Jewish law, our sages in Jewish law tells us, his sustenance is very little, and it is very difficult for him to find food. And that's why his intestines, his stomach is made that he can keep food up to 3 days. I'm not a science, I'm not a veterinarian. I'm just sharing with you what the Medrash says, that his stomach is created in a way that he can retain the food for 3 days. And the reason is because it's very difficult for him to find food. Therefore, on Shabbat, not only I am allowed to feed my own animals, like my fish tank, like my parrots, like my cat, even if it's a stray dog, assuming it's safe, a dog going by that's not mine is the exception, that it is allowed to feed them on Shabbat. A cat, a rat, a fish, a turtle, it is forbidden to feed them on Shabbat if they're not mine and I'm not the one who feeds them constantly. I grew up in a country, in a village where agriculture and animals was part of daily life. I raised chickens. There were people who have had ducks, etc., donkeys, horses, cows, bulls. They had to feed them before they sat down to eat. It was a requirement by Jewish law. By the way, that the rule that it's prohibited to feed animals unless it's my animal apply not only on Shabbat but also during the holidays. And on holidays, it's even more prohibited than Shabbat. We're not going to get into it. That's why some people, and I saw it here in America, when they go for tashlich, I'm not going to go into details. They go for tashlich, they go to say a certain prayer on Rosh Hashanah, they bring bread with them to feed the fish. But in reality, during a holiday, it is total prohibition. It's a sin to feed the fish, unless it's my fish in my fish tank. And therefore, I do not allow people to cast breadcrumbs over to the fish in a fish pond where we go, even though there are fish and they can benefit. If you really care, you can come the day before Rosh Hashanah or the day after. Why do I say all that? Because in this week's portion, we find a very peculiar order. I just shared with you that the rule is that we must feed the animals before we ourselves are eating. And I gave you 3 reasons. One is to be tsar ba'alei chaim, not to prevent them from suffering. 2, to imitate God, and 3, sometimes God will save us for the sake of the animals. If so, we read in this week's portion the main story after reading about Sarah's demise and Sarah being buried in the cave of Machpelah. We read in this week's portion about Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. He is going to find a wife to his master's son, to Yitzchak, to Isaac. How does he travels very far. Soon I'm going to get into much deeper detail when I'm talking about the second Dvar Torah. How does he define? He turned to God after great miracles that in one day he did the whole travel. He turned to God and says the following. It's on page 142 in our Chumash, chapter 24, verse 14. He says to God, I want to find a very kind-hearted girl to my master's son. How will I find out if she's a kind-hearted person? Here is how I'm going to find out. And he said, if I say to a girl, when I meet a girl, a young girl, and I say to the girl, please, till down your pitcher and let me drink. I'm a stranger. I come from far. Can you give me some drink, something to drink? And she says, drink, and I will also give you camels to drink. She offers not only me to drink, but she will let my camels, 10 camels came with them, as we read just before. If she will offer to feed, to provide water, not just for me, but for my animals, my camels as well, I know, he says, that the one to be chosen by you for your servant, for Yitzchak. That's how I know she's the right girl. The problem I have here is that he's going to ask for himself, and then he's going to feed the camels. Eliezer followed Jewish law. He followed the customs he heard and studied in his master's house. That's why he was so special. Not only that, later on, we find when he found Rivka, the girl, here is what he says to her, verse 17. The same page, 143 in our Chumash in English. The servant ran toward her and said, please, let me sip a little water from your pitcher. He's asking for a little water. He's a stranger they never met before. He's by the well. She's a shepherdess. And he's asking her for water. She said, drink, sir. She quickly took down her pitcher from her shoulder into her hand and gave him to drink. When she finished giving him a drink, she said, I will also draw water for your camels until they have finished drinking as much as they want. She quickly emptied her pitcher into the trough and ran to the well again to draw water. She kept drawing. She drew water for all his camel, and the man was amazed by her. He observed her silently to know whether God had led his way to success or not. He's shocked. Exactly what he's asking from God before he finishes asking, actually. Before he concludes speaking to God, she appears and she says to him, not only you should drink, I'm going to feed, I'm going to give you camels to drink. And she kept pouring. Anybody who dealt with camels will tell you that letting camels drink is not an easy task. It actually may take hours. They can drink enough for 4 or 5 days or more, and they drink 30, 40 gallons each. So she kept feeding 10 camels. The question I have, without getting into other details, it's such a fascinating story. How is it possible that the Torah records that he drank and only then they offer water for the camels? The order should be first the animals, then the camels. We just discussed that. The following is some of the commentators' answer, and I'm going to stick to one answer. The commentators say there is a distinction between food and drink. So to say, drink is necessity. A man can survive without eating for a long time. a man cannot survive without liquid. So for example, if someone make a vow that he will not eat for a week, he has to fulfill his vow. If someone made a vow he will not drink for a week, the vow does not take hold. The reason is that it's impossible for human being to go for more than 3 days without a drink. Therefore, because it's necessity, it comes before the animals. And therefore, the Jewish law tells us, by the way, we see the same thing if you have a chance to look at the story of the hitting the rock. Moses is hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock. It says, "Vatesh ha'eda u'beiram." The water came flowing, and the people drank, and the animals did too. In other words, we see that the animals are secondary because it's about drinking. It's not about food. What it teaches us is that we have to make sure we understand the difference between necessity and what's next. When it comes to helping somebody else or myself, if it's about necessity, I have to provide for myself. That's why on a plane, hopefully we'll resume back the activities. But anybody who remember in the ancient times who used to fly in planes, they tell you that if you have a baby, please, and there is an emergency, please put a mask over your face and then secure the mask over the child. And the reason is because when it comes to necessities, we have to put ourselves first. And only then our surrounding, those whom we are responsible for, or those who are expecting our help. And that's the same is about what happens in our relationship with others. Sometimes for other people, it's literally a necessity to connect them to Judaism, to teach them Torah. It's not just a hobby. It's not just to enrich their knowledge, but it becomes a necessity to keep them connected to God. And we need to therefore put them on the highest priority. That's the first point I wanted to share today. Just 1 minute. I wanted to be a little quieter. Guys, I need quiet. I'm teaching. The second point I spoke about before, I believe, but I think it's worth mentioning again. And I do not want to play any political to any side. As I said on Shabbat, I vote to whomever you vote. If you voted one way, that's where I voted. If the other way, that's where I voted. I am not taking any sides, and I'm not saying anybody is right or wrong. But I do think it's worth mentioning. A couple of years ago, they opened up a new museum in Las Vegas. It's called the Mobsters Museum, the Gangsters Museum. And in that museum, they bring the history of all the gangsters and all the mafias. I am sure that you know about the mafias, and probably you know better than me, but a lot of Jews were involved in the mafia. And some of them are very actively involved in the creation of the city of Las Vegas. One of them, very famous, is Bugsy Siegel. The other is Meyer Lansky. Both of these, in their time, were great leaders in the mafia. During the late 30s, when the Nazis came into power in Germany, there was a new movement in the United States of America of groups banding together representing the Nazi ideology. And they were dressed like Nazis, they walked like Nazis, they spoke like Nazis, and they wanted to have the same solution that Hitler was planning here in the United States of America. In large cities, they would get together and march and shout, and they became quite forceful in the thousands. They had many conventions or marches in New York. They had many marches in Chicago and in Memphis. the Jewish leaders at the time realized that they need to stop it. Otherwise, God forbid, who knows what will happen. So Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, one of the notable leaders of the Jewish community here in America at the time, one day called Bugsy Siegel for a meeting, and he says to him, I think it's time the Jewish people can benefit from you guys. The Nazis are trying to spread their ideology, hate, and speaking to them, convincing them, teaching them is not necessarily the way that it's going to work. So we need you to go in and do it your way. However, I want to make sure, it says to the mafia guys, to the Jewish, to Bugsy Siegel he spoke, I want to make sure that you do not kill anybody. Killing is a no-no. Also, he says to him, if you need any financial assistance, let us know, we'll find the money. They got a very similar call from a very notable Jewish judge at the time, who said the same exact things, that it's time for them to show and use their skills in a positive way. And if they need any financial use, you will be helping. Of course, they got very offended. They were insulted that they're going to need financial help. They're the one who is getting all the finances that they need. And of course, and that's what they did. We're short in time. It's a very fascinating part of Jewish history in America. They marched in 15 men one evening to a large in the thousands of gathering of Nazis. They described it as most of the people there were dressed like Nazis. They felt that they come into a place where they did from a different universe, from a different country. People were dressed in brown, wearing the symbols of the Nazism, and they were speaking about it. Those 15 men came in and started beating up every single person they can find. They threw people out the windows to the street. And when everybody ran away, there were thousands of 2,000 people. When the people ran away, they chased them. They chased the leaders in the streets. They did the same thing 3 more times in New York, and that's when it came to a final end. Then they traveled to Chicago. Chicago was also a large city that had many, many Nazis, and they walked into a march, and they start beating them up with baseball bats, with their hands, bare hands, and that shuts it down. And then they moved to Memphis, and they did it, and that was the end. Later on, they also helped with the foundation of the State of Israel. They assisted with finances. They gave a large sum of money to the Haganah and Etzel, to the Irgun and the Haganah, the underground organizations that were illegal in America to assist, and they provided $50,000 in cash. And they also the one who's credited with assisting and guaranteeing the transportation of ammunitions, because we had here the son of a mobster, of a gangster, spoke. I forgot his name. I get emails from him every day, and he says that together with the Italian mafia, they were able to allow in the ports of New York and New Jersey for ammunition to go against the law, which was illegal, but yet the mafia was able to arrange for that. The reason I share that with you is because in this week's portion, it's a very, very strange story. We read about Abraham is looking for a wife to his son. Eliezer has a daughter, and Eliezer is his servant. And Eliezer is the one that loved him and followed. He's a real chassid. Yet Abraham says, no, you go to far away to Haran. And it needs miracles. And then we find, I'm going to go very quick because we're short in time. After he finds out that Rivka is the one God is pointing out, if you go to the page 138, page 144, 145, they turned out and they invited him to the house, and they say to him, come in, Baruch Hashem, the one who is blessed by God. We have a place for you to sleep. And he starts speaking. They offer him food. And if you read on page 145 on the bottom, they offer Eliezer, the servant, some food. And Eliezer said to them, and food was placed before him, but he said, I will not eat until I've spoken my words. I refuse. I am on a mission. I have to carry out my mission. I am not going to eat until I share with you. And then he goes on in the morning. Bethuel, the father of Rebekah, is not around anymore. It's Laban and the mother of the girl. And they want to delay maybe a year's time. And they said, Eliezer said, I'm sorry, I have no time. We have to go. And finally, Rebekah said she wants to go, and she's going with them. What's fascinating is, where is Bethuel? Where is the father of the girl overnight? So everybody knows that he was killed. He died. But here is the Midrash that gives us the details. The Midrash says that if you read on page 145 and 143, you will read that Eliezer was extremely wealthy, and he came with a very large sum of cash and gold and animals to prove that the girl that is going to marry this man, she's going to be very well off. Laban and Bethuel, they see a very rich man. They were real down-to-earth gangster, and they decided to murder him. But Eliezer was a very strong man. We knew he was in Saddam last week that the Midrash talks about. He was a very strong man physically. So they can't just take out a sword or a dagger. They figured, let's put poison in his food, and overnight he will not wake up. So then we will take everything he bought. That's why Eliezer, God made him not eat. He said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to eat until I speak my words. While he was speaking, an angel came and switched the plates. The portion that placed before Bethuel was given to Eliezer. Eliezer's plate came to Bethuel, and Bethuel is the one who did not get up in the morning. Later on, we know about Laban. Laban is the worst creep you can imagine. In the Haggadah, we start our history by saying that Laban wanted to destroy us all. And the question is, why is Abraham want to marry a gangster, a gangster family? Rebekah's father was a real murderer. Rebekah's brother Laban, we know he cheated Jacob with his daughters. He was the master of cunning. He was a very bad characteristic human being. And yet we see that Abraham is going through such a lengthy process to marry from that family. And the answer, very briefly, because we're out of time, is that sometimes we, the Jewish people, need to have gangsters too. There is part of the universe. It's not enough just to come into a meeting and explain my point of view and try to convince you to understand my point of view. There are times when we have to resort to another venue, another avenue. And when that time comes, we need to have it within the Jewish people. And perhaps this will explain why Rebekah is part of the family. Rebekah brought in that dimension that Abraham felt may be used in a positive way when the time comes. And that's the point I wanted to share with you, because I think we are faced with great challenges, and people are asking, what can we do? What should we do? And one of the ways is stand up and defend ourselves, and make sure to stand up to those people and bring them to justice. And I do not advocate any illegal activities, God forbid, but all I'm saying is that I'm advocating to stand up and say to people, we will not bend down, we will not be afraid, we will not run away, but we'll stand up and make sure that anyone who needs to be brought to justice will be brought to justice for their misbehaving. And with that, I would like to conclude and wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. And I hope to